First of all, let's start in coughing out that Russia is ready for peace ready for peace directly with Ukraine based on the talks. What do you think? Was there anything remarkable in this signal for you?
Well, there aren't clear rules. As soon as Putin opens his mouth, it's a sure sign he is lying. Therefore, there is nothing particularly remarkable here. Well, he just lies with different intonations, so to speak, and with different wording and tone. And there's practically nothing new here at all. Putin has always said he is ready. Well, that's his usual mantra. We are always ready for negotiations. Let Zelensky come to Moscow. But that's usually how it sounds. This time, he didn't say anything about Moscow, but strictly speaking, there is no difference. In reality, everything that is happening now testifies to the fact that Putin is not ready to end the war. Negotiations, well, again, negotiations with some underlings, they make sense at all. Of course, under the influence and pressure primarily from the American side, Ukraine might perhaps go for some kind of imitation of negotiations, just not to spoil relations with either its allies or those who pretend to be allies. But there is any prospect at all now of ending the war at the negotiating table. As of today, the movement toward ending the war is happening on the battlefield. And the end of the war is being quite seriously brought closer by the Ukrainian drones. And this is the only thing, Ukrainian drones, Ukrainian missiles, and the armed forces of Ukraine in general. That is what is driving the war to an end. Everything else, right? I mean, practically what is happening now is first and foremost turning Crimea into an island, strikes on the Russian oil industry, strikes on the Russian military industrial complex, and that is what is bringing the end of the war closer. And negotiations just an imitation, those are empty negotiations. I think that is exactly how we should treat this.
You hit the nail on the head, because at the meeting, Putin also demanded that there be no consequences after Ukrainian drone attacks at Putin. I wonder what he meant by that. From other statements, countries helping to launch drones at Russia don't realize the consequences. That is, it's a threat. Russia has always been provoked and then accused of aggression. Well, it's clear here that it was about Zelensky's open letter, which, mind you, was allegedly intended to create conflict potential. There was something about Hitler too, but let's not go into details here. Putin remembered Starobilsk and was lamenting it all. How so? Kiev struck after the announcement of readiness for negotiations. And he also stated that the armed forces of Ukraine, well, the dictator's traditional psychological operation, are hitting civilian infrastructure with drones to try to destabilize Russian society down. He also said that there are forces in the West that want to restore relations with the Russian Federation. I would stop at this point, because before that, the dictator said that he is actually at war with Europe, that Europe is an accomplice to Ukraine in this war, and then that someone there is ready to negotiate with him, is ready to negotiate. Which countries do you think he is talking about? Or is this just a fantasy?
Well, it's about specific individuals. In a number of European countries, there are people who want to restore relations with Russia. It is not about any specific individual countries, but about individual politicians, some of whom are in general now removed from politics. For example, Viktor Orban, who, strictly speaking, never ceased relations with Russia. This is Gerhard Schröder, who never ceased relations with Russia. Some of these politicians have already permanently moved to Russia and simply became Russian citizens. For instance, the Austrian foreign minister, who is simply already, so to speak, in Putin's inner pocket. Well, that is, there are such politicians. There is Alternative for Germany, a very influential German party that wants to restore everything, that wants to forget that the war even exists. So such politicians, of course, exist. In general, to say that any country today is on this side after Viktor Orban left politics in Hungary, Well, I probably cannot name such a country it's unknown. Well, to some extent it might be about Bulgaria, but even that is unlikely. Therefore, it is about individual politicians. So in general, the European mainstream is of course against this. In Europe, to my regret, there is an illusion that one needs down to Putin. That is the unpleasant side of European politics. But even here, perhaps most European leaders believe that negotiations should be held with Putin. But to speak about the restoring relations with Russia, it seems to me, well, I don't know which European country could be meant.
Lavrov also, as we announced, we would like to talk in more detail about his speech and statements. At a roundtable on the war in Ukraine and global security, the foreign minister expressed his entire attitude toward what is happening. Well, let's listen and then we will discuss it.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you have the opportunity to ask questions. Whoever wishes to ask a question, a microphone will be provided to them for. Are there any who wish to?
You guessed it.
Not that already. Please, you mean?
No. To hell with it.
Well, a little moment of diplomacy lessons from Comrade Lavrov. He also expressed his attitude regarding a Russian nuclear strike at a closed meeting of the Council on Foreign and Dales Policy. Moreover, the head of Russian diplomacy is suggesting a nuclear strike. Are we understanding this correctly? Wasn't his generation raised on the thesis that there are no winners in a nuclear war? What do you think about these theses of his? And, of course, about his diplomatic statements in general?
You know, Lavrov is largely a remarkable figure because he is the man who liquidated diplomacy in Russia. That is, during his time as foreign minister, Lavrov managed what no one else in Russian history had managed to do, meaning the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia, because one could always have different attitudes to Soviet diplomacy. There were some very controversial figures, such as Molotov, such as Gromyko, Mr. No, but still, it was diplomacy. After all, despite all the disgust for what Molotov did, it was nevertheless diplomacy. That is, they proceeded from their own peculiar understanding of the country's interests, and in general, they were actually able to defend those interests. Lavrov liquidated diplomacy in Russia altogether as a sphere of public life and as a part of a state administration. That is, as of today, the task of diplomats is ultimately to improve relations with other countries, because if relations are bad, war ensues. So Lavrov managed over more than a quarter century as foreign minister to create a situation where there are practically no countries in Russia's immediate neighborhood with which relations have not there and in a radical way did. Well, the only one, so to speak, occupied Belarus could be named as a country with which normal relations have remained. With everyone else, they are either openly hostile or, so to speak, coldly tense. And Lavrov's language, that famous coughing of his when a person just swears on live air, well, yes, that a new word in diplomacy. So in this sense, he is a very unique person. And I think that as such, foreign minister, well, I would say that he is very useful for Ukraine because he manages, along with his entourage, with several people, as Maria Zakharova, Nebenzia, Ryabkov. And so these are people who push everyone away from Russia, who spoil relations with the outside world, and this undoubtedly weakens Russia. So, in general, despite my deep disgust for the character, I wish for him to remain in power and worsen relations with the outside world.
Russia's, which weakens it.
Yes, it is now unclear whose side he is playing on.
He and Zakharova, as the common face of Russian diplomacy, always amaze, but definitely not in a positive sense. But
Igor, as you know, we have an interactive format. You have already mentioned Belarus, so let us talk about it. They ask, we are interested in your opinion regarding this country. Will it become a full-fledged participant in the war? After all, various experts express different opinions. Are subscribers right? And would it be a mistake if Ukraine destroys the Russian equipment that is in Belarus, as I understand Zelensky announced, Furthermore, I would also like to inform our viewers that Peskov, in parallel with those events taking place regarding the towers, yes, the zones, yes, they can review regarding the yes, the equipment on them. In the territory of the Republic of Belarus, said that Putin will personally discuss with Lukashenko Ukraine's demands drones, yes? For drones, he also called Zelensky's words an attempt to further incite the continuation of the war over them now.
although it would seem, yes, they want to remove the repeater so that there is no war.
A short clip from the press secretary, and then we will discuss it.
Indeed, and you know that Alexander Grigorievich also spoke about this. They plan to have contacts in the foreseeable future. This will be a good opportunity to discuss these and other issues. Yes, of course, the threat is absolutely aggressive. Interference in the internal affairs of another party, an encroachment on the sovereignty of another country. But we have no doubt that the leadership of Belarus and Belarus itself is capable of ensuring its own sovereignty.
How do you think, will Putin finally drag Lukashenko into his war, considering the intelligence data, by the way, which was passed to Kiev, as well as the reaction to what is happening in the public sphere?
Let's dot some I's. Well, first of all, regarding being dragged in and interference in sovereignty, you see, if Belarus is, without a doubt, an accomplice in the aggression, it is an accomplice in the aggression because strikes were launched from its territory and Russian troops crossed from its territory. And according to all international laws, this is complicity in aggression. That is, in fact, this is an international crime. So, well, even more so, the presence of equipment, the presence of repeaters, with the help of which strikes are carried out on the territory of Ukraine. This is undoubtedly participation in the war. That is simply undoubted. It's unconditional here. And so the fact that Ukrainian President Zelensky brought into the public sphere what had existed through non-public channels for quite a long time, this demand, so to speak, to remove these relay stations. And this ultimatum is not just a perfectly normal action but a determination put an end to this murder of Ukrainian citizens coordinated with Russia. So that's the first point. Second, notice that Lukashenko is silent. This is a very important circumstance that must be kept in mind. The deadline for this ultimatum, which was set last Friday, expires either this Friday. Well, it depends on how you count a week, whether from Friday to Friday or from Friday to Saturday. And quite soon we will understand what is happening. Lukashenko is silent. There, the head of the Gomel regional administration responded with something absolutely vague. Then the absolutely insane Azarok spoke out with nasty attacks against Zelensky. This is exactly an indicator of what Lukashenko actually thinks about this matter. Lukashenko wants to apologize for rudeness toward Zelensky. Lukashenko's silence and the fact that Russian authorities are speaking instead of him means that Lukashenko certainly does not want to and will not fight against Ukraine. For him, this is suicide. And the suicide is not in the fact that the Belarusian army will be destroyed, but that Lukashenko faces an extremely unpleasant possibility of meeting his own people. That is, if the security forces and the Belarusian army are destroyed, which is the inevitable result of a military clash with Ukraine, then Lukashenko will be left one-on-one with his own people. This is what he fears most of all. Therefore, I think that intensive consultations are currently taking place between Belarus and Russia. The Jews, Lukashenko is likely in constant close contact with Putin and is trying to reach an agreement, trying to ensure that the inevitable strike on Saturday, that is, if the relay stations are not removed, is avoided, although it is more or less obvious that Ukraine will simply destroy them. The capabilities for this exist. It is, in general, not such a difficult task. A stationary target, or perhaps mobile, I don't know, there might be mobile relays, but at least we are talking about stable ones for now. And therefore, I think the very intensive consultations are taking place right now. On one hand, it is awkward to back down publicly, but there is another big question in Zelensky's ultimatum. It wasn't just about the relay stations, it was also about supplies. Products from Belarus's oil refineries. It is a bit more complicated here because I am confident that Lukashenko is not the one who controls the supply of these Belarusian oil products. Naturally, I don't fully know to what extent the Belarusian dictator actually controls this country, how much he is capable of. Zelensky has issued an ultimatum to Lukashenko, and I'm not 100% sure that Lukashenko is in a position to fulfill this demand, because I'm not sure he makes decisions independently regarding the relays stations, let alone petroleum products. Regarding the petroleum products, I am sure that he is not capable of stopping the supplies. I think that these supplies are controlled by Russia. As for the relay stations, that is also possible. Therefore, everything now depends on, how, so to speak, what they agree upon. Lukashenko is, of course, trying to persuade Putin to compromise, but I don't think that will be easy to do. So we shall see. That's live until Saturdays, they say. Well, as for the main question, namely whether Belarus might be drawn into the war with Ukraine, this is one of those cases where, well, I rarely make a categorical forecast because we live in a probabilistic world. But the probability that Lukashenko will allow Belarusian troops, and they are very few, they are very, very weak, but Belarus has never fought as the modern post-Soviet Belarus has never fought. Therefore, the probability that Lukashenko will go to war with Ukraine, well, I would consider it zero. It simply won't happen. Lukashenko is not suicidal. He is an experienced, seasoned dictator who has vast experience in surviving in much more difficult conditions than Putin. Therefore, I think that he will not be able to commit suicide. Well, he wouldn't want to. He is not suicidal, so I think he will not enter the war with Ukraine. And as for the ultimatum, everything depends on how well he can persuade Putin not to let things escalate to strikes. But if not, then in the end, Ukraine will destroy these relay stations. It is not the most difficult task.
I also wanted to talk about another topic in particular, that the U.S. stated at the UN that Russia is wasting time and should reach an agreement with Ukraine as soon as possible, as the situation for Moscow is only getting worse. Just a few seconds and we will hear that very statement and those very points, and then we will discuss this topic a little.
As President Trump made clear at the G7 summit last week, Russia must make a deal. Time is not on Moscow's side. Russia is suffering 40,000 casualties per month. Its economy is under severe pressure. Ukraine is rapidly innovating. Diplomacy and negotiations, not further bloodshed? The only answer. Nothing else will stop these senseless killings. This war has lasted too long and must end.
Do you think the dynamics of the negotiations will change? Why might they change? And in general, do you agree with the previous speaker?
Well, as for the previous speaker, he is repeating, albeit a bit late, what we have been discussing for, well, at least the last year. That is the fact that it seems to me that a turning point, a radical turn, the final disappearance of the so-called spirit of anchorage occurred at the last G7 meeting when Donald Trump, having suffered a crushing defeat in Iran, arrived there somewhat humble, though with his usual arrogance. But nevertheless, it was consensually acknowledged there that first, Russia cannot win. Russia is not winning, it cannot win. And second, that Ukraine is gradually seizing the initiative. And it must be said that what we have just heard, we heard right there at G7 when Trump spoke about the fact that this is actually a radical change in Trump's position. The question is, how stable is it? Well, at least for now. He had previously said that the main obstacle to peace was personally the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. But now he said that Putin must make a deal. Putin. So once again, the main obstacle is now Putin. And the reason is very simple. Trump, as a, well, with a representative of spontaneous fascism, proceeds from the maxim of the right of the strong. That is, the one who is stronger is always right. Before this, it seemed to Trump that Putin was strong, and therefore he fawned over Putin. Therefore, just as he fawns over Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un, he was convinced that, well, Russia is big, so to speak, big and strong, and therefore Ukraine should surrender. That was his position throughout his entire second term. But now he has become convinced that no, it turns out that it is Ukraine that is strong. And therefore, Trump, as a supporter of the right of the strong, has now, well, to some extent, switched to the side of Ukraine. Will this be converted into any change? Well, in a material sense, will there be any more significant aid or support provided and so on? And I think not. I think not. That will not happen. And as for the negotiation process, I am still convinced that there will be no negotiation process, no real negotiation process that will end the war. There will be an imitation. As for the position of the United States, that is good. Por esos tres good. Because a statement, albeit not very articulate, was made by Trump granting Ukraine licenses to produce long-range missiles and air defense missiles earlier. And there was also such an assurance from the Europeans that is serious. You see, I think that what matters is not the words, but their conversion into concrete material actions. And I hope that this will happen. I mean, if Ukraine has Western style long-range missiles, then the process of turning Crimea into an island and destroying the Russian oil industry and military-industrial complex will proceed much faster. So for me, this side of the issue is more important. As for the statement by the United States representative, well, listen, the person is playing the role of Captain Obvious. One can only applaud.